Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, here with my co-host Chris, the guy who just wants summer to keep on going and never end, McNulty.
Well, who doesn't want summer to keep on going other than Snow Miser? I don't know how to continue after an intro like that there.
I think I was projecting. I was just hoping that others felt the same.
Well, let's get to the subject at hand. Today, we'll be hearing from information architect Sue Hanley and her Microsoft customer, Carol Zollinger, from the Christian Children's Home of Ohio. The focus of the discussion will be guidance and best practices for describing technical challenges and working together to address them.
So we leaned on Sue, who you all probably know within the community and beyond, so that we could discover how she approaches working with her customers, in particular with working with Carol, and how she works with them to find an integral solution, not doing it for them, but as you'll hear, with them, and as you'll hear Sue reiterate as one of the most important things to do to ensure that there is knowledge transfer, which, Chris, I think you can tell me something about. How do people transfer knowledge?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the classic way that we learn to tell knowledge is oral tradition, right? That people from time immemorial sit around campfires and tell stories. That's how knowledge got transferred from generation to generation, which doesn't scale. And so then you get writing, then you get printing, then you get the internet, and you get all of these different scale engines. But the ways that people transfer knowledge, it does remind me a little bit of, if you've ever seen any of the really interesting FBI photographs for counter-espionage in the 50s, and all the dead drops. Like, people would put information somewhere, waiting for someone else to come along and pick it up. And they never talk to each other. And that's for reasons of espionage. But the advantage of that personal knowledge transfer is you can get that immediate feedback. Like, is what I'm telling you, does it make sense? Do you have questions? How can I give you answers? And that part of the process can be a little hard given what most people do for quote unquote knowledge transfer. Because what most people still do for knowledge transfer is they will put something in a Word doc or a PowerPoint or some other file format and save it somewhere, hoping that if anyone ever has a question later, they'll come along and search for it. And that is really a great example of documentation. I think it's a poor example of knowledge transfer. And I don't know what your experience has been, Mark. Would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I like the visual of that briefcase. You set it down, somebody else picks it up, and then they've got the goods, the details. But in this case, literally, the briefcase in this case is something that we want to make sure is unlocked and open to everybody. But I think to your point, if it's just a document that articulates, here's what we did, and if you want to go use it, here's what you need to go do. But when you actually, again, you'll hear this from Sue and Carol's response to it in terms of being open and responsive to how Sue transferred knowledge to her, is that you have to be active in the transfer. You have to be willing to do it, signed up to do it. We always talk about executive sponsorship. One of the things they really get into here is having a champion, having somebody that you literally transfer your knowledge to carry it forward, so that Sue gets hired for a period of time, but then in the duration of time, Carol and her colleagues will then take up what Sue taught them and actually to ensure that they learned it by doing. So a lot of what they were highlighting as the value of knowledge transfer was for Carol and her team to actually do the work, not to only do the work, but to do the work with Sue. And I think a lot of that, to your question, is the learning from doing, having ownership. Clearly, they worked with Sue for a particular reason. And in working with Sue, there was also the note that Sue wouldn't be there forever. She's always connected to her customers, but at some point, there will be that need for them to be a lot more self-sufficient. So I think a lot of it is in doing.
What's important in kind of the exchange of information, I think, between a technical side and the business side is spread out on that spectrum between data and information and knowledge. So a piece of data could be 80, and a piece of information could be 80 degrees. But the context is when it really turns into knowledge and makes it useful. Because it was 80 degrees at the beach today is a good predictor for what we might experience tomorrow. It was 80 degrees today at the beach on Christmas, where we live in the northern United States, would seem extraordinary. And it was 80 degrees in the oven while I was cooking turkey on Thanksgiving would suggest you may want to find something else to eat.
My hope is that you weren't in the oven, and my hope is that you're talking about a vacation that we're going to get to take right in the middle of winter from the Northwest to somewhere 80 degrees.
Of course. But being able to put business requirements in kind of the context of business objectives and being able to put technical details in the context of why those decisions were made is really important to make sure that you're speaking across that divide. And that's something that I know that, Sue, who is a longstanding MVP and advocate for governance across so many of Microsoft's public conferences and customer relations and so forth, Sue is very adept at bridging the divide and making it not a divide at all. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she's going to share with Carol.
Yeah, so let's jump right in. You'll hear Sue's process. You're going to hear a lot of the things that they actually built if you're interested in the technology that they implemented. But a lot of it was the content and people process. And again, that value of having Sue bleed into then Carol and her team being much more self-sufficient going forward. So let's introduce Sue and Carol. Sue and Carol, let me be the first one to welcome you to the Intro Zone. Before you're really welcome to the Intro Zone, I want to just say it was a real pleasure to see you both. Certainly, Sue, I've known for a while, and Carol, to meet you for the first time at the recent 365 EduCon in Seattle. But for sure, welcome to the Intro Zone.
Thanks for having us.
So can I just ask real quickly what you both have been doing since you were in Seattle? You've returned. Did you bring back a ton of knowledge and put it into place?
I have been trying to decide what to do first, to be honest. I have so many ideas since I came back from Seattle that I want to do all of them at once. And I just am trying to prioritize and figure out what gives us the most bang for the buck.
And Sue, did you come walking away with any new pieces of feedback or, partnering with folks that are having some of the similar issues and, pressing to make sure that they get fixed soon?
Yeah, I had really, really great conversations with people about the work that they were doing with, other speakers and with people who were attending the event. It was really, a great opportunity to learn about what people are doing, learn what their challenges are, and to commiserate on some of the things that we were all sharing in common.
I think one of the things that, as we get into the therapeutic notions of this episode, I don't want to get into the specifics, and you'll probably understand why. But with Carol, I know one of the questions that you had was a little bit around calendaring and some of the nuances of calendaring across Microsoft 365. But the more important thing than the calendaring was what it led to, which was an amazing pair of Microsoft List socks. Yes?
Yes. And I was actually accused of showing off because I have TSA pre-check, but on the way home, they made me take off my shoes. And my colleague said, are you just trying to show off?
Well, if they got you through TSA in a more quick fashion, then I think more power to lists. All right, so let's get into what it is that we really want to get out of your brains, because it was a really great conversation at 365 EduCon that really led us to think, that would be a really great episode to think, what is it that customers really need to know when they go in and are considering, what do we need to do? How do we go about it? Who gets involved? And we've worked with Sue over many, many years, knowing that that really is a tip of the spear area where she works. So just to get a little definition for the episode of where we're headed, and then to get in specifics with Carol, Sue, I wanted to start with you. Just if this is this notion of tech therapy with Sue Hanley, What is that first meeting and some of those first things that customers, when you start working with them, should know either about your process or something that just is really a good set of process questions, things to know before, they really dig into jumping to the requirements or the outcomes, that upfront work that you do. Can you share a little bit of your ideology, your methodology for when you first connect with a customer and what you expect from them?
Well, for the most part, I think you know this, Mark, but I'm an information architect and a business analyst. And so I specialize in intranets and collaboration solutions. And so the conversations I typically have are sort of in that vein. We want to achieve better. We want to improve our intranet. We want to have better knowledge management outcomes. And so I'm usually working with clients on those kinds of problems. And for me, the most important criteria to know if we have a shot at being successful is that the initiative and the outcomes are important to the leadership team, because otherwise it's really hard to get the right kind of attention and engagement, especially if organizational change is involved. So having sort of an executive sponsor, ideally not just IT, is really critical when you're sort of getting to the point where you want to start what is effectively a change initiative. So that's the most important thing for me. And the second thing is making sure that I have let's call it a partner on the inside. So I will always tell my clients, I can't build an intranet for you. I can only do it with you. So you need to be committed to participate in the discovery as well as the prioritization and planning. And that was probably one of the most fun things about working with Carol's organization, is that I got Carol to be my partner there. And so one of the things that she was committed to doing was learning the technology. And, there's always going to be these trade-offs and options when you're making design decisions and trying to decide what's the best way to accomplish something in SharePoint. And having Carol as a partner to be involved in those decisions, understanding the implications that may be involved, choosing sort of one way or another, was really important, and I think is important in general.
That notion of working with Carol, I will just tell you, I have worked with Sue for many years and throughout many projects, big and small. So my hat's off to you for being lucky enough to work with Sue, and it sounds like she with you. Can you share maybe just a little bit of what CCHO is and maybe your side of catching that first response of working with Sue, once we understand a little bit of what you were all starting to work on, but the focus of what CCHO is and then maybe, your first impressions when you started working with Sue?
So CCHO is Christian Children's Home of Ohio, and it started out as a residential center for children from hard places, and it has grown in the years since. It's been open for about 50 years. We still have a residential center, but we also have a foster care department, and we have outpatient therapists. So they see pediatric clients, but they also see adult clients. So really a mental health focus and a community focus, which brings with it some different challenges. On top of being a nonprofit environment is always a little bit different as well. My boss, Greg, I know Sue talked about having executive team buy-in, and he was really our champion there. He had been wanting to move this organization to SharePoint for years and just did not have the staffing to allow someone to focus on it, couldn't get where he wanted to go as far as hiring a consultant, wasn't really happy with anyone he talked to. We had, as a team, decided we were going to go to what was then called SharePoint Fest in April of 2020. And of course, that didn't happen. But in the meantime, they organized virtual workshops. And so I ended up taking virtually Sue's all-day workshop on information architecture. And I attended several workshops, but that really hit the sweet spot as far as what we were looking for, where we needed to start, and the philosophy that I saw when Sue presented. I was really interested in working with somebody who would help me understand the structure and the why we were doing it a certain way, just really to give us a good foundation as far as continuing to build it out. I knew that I would have to do, a lot of it would be my responsibility. I very much wanted to work with someone who was able to give me that big picture. And I was so impressed with Sue in the workshop. You're right. I feel very lucky to have made this connection. That is where we first made contact with each other and how we found each other.
If I'm making a few assumptions, specific to who your real charge is to help these children in the best way possible with various services, a number of different types of people probably coming and working with them, maybe on-site, maybe off-site. The notion I think you hinted at, I think might be around compliance or HIPAA in terms of privacy. There hopefully is an overarching, when you start to invest in something like Office 365 or Microsoft 365 and start to use the different services, there's the importance of being compliant, but there's also being the importance of getting that out of the way and really focusing on who do we need to serve and how do we need to serve them best. Do you mind, Sue, taking it from your perspective? Obviously, on that day, you were delivering a course that was pretty well planned out and articulated across the common things that you see across a lot of customers in different industries and whatnot. But is there anything that you can share specifically around that first meeting and then maybe the first few months of assessing what CCHO needed from a tech readiness and maybe some of those early wins that you were going to focus on from an adoption perspective?
Well, I think fundamentally the goal of any kind of a starting or understanding or discovery initiative is really trying to figure out what the business problems are or the business goals are. I mean, ultimately, if an intranet doesn't serve the business, it's going to die on the vine. It has to be tied to what's important to the organization. It's a platform for communications, but it's an opportunity to deliver information, but it's also a place where you can get work done. And what's really important is that you want to make sure that whatever we're doing is tied to some important organizational goal. So, starting out by making sure we have a really good understanding of what's important to the organization and how the intranet fits into that, I think is that's the main thing I'm trying to figure out. So I never ask questions like, what do you want on the intranet? Because that's it's just going to put people in a box and they're going to reference what they currently have. Instead, I want to understand how information flows, how work gets done, who's collaborating with whom, where the challenges and barriers are, both culturally and organizationally, because it's never just about the technology. It's also about how people work together, how people communicate with one another, and all about the culture of the organization. And I don't go in knowing very much of anything. That's the most fun thing about being a consultant, is that you get to ask lots and lots of questions and not feel totally dumb, because you're supposed to ask lots of questions. And what you're trying to figure out is, where are those challenges going to be, and what should we be planning to try and overcome those challenges?
And Carol, about those questions, were there times when you thought, gosh, nobody's ever asked us that particular question, or maybe even more simplified in retrospect, how come we didn't ever really look at it that way? Was there anything specific before we get into where you started first? When you think about some of the ways that Sue approached and, started to ask you, I got some questions before we get started.
So one of the things that Sue does when she's working with someone like this is sends out the questions that she's going to be discussing with a group of stakeholders in advance. And reading through those was really instructive for me as well, to think about what kinds of processes we have and whether that's the best way to do that. I know one of the things you said, Sue, at the end of every meeting was, if money were no object, if you could have anything you wanted, what would you ask for? And sometimes the answer was absolutely pie in the sky. And sometimes it was very simple. That's really one of the things that I learned. When I talked to Sue in Seattle, we got a chance to just sit down and, really chat, which was wonderful. But I said, I feel like I learned so much from her, not just about SharePoint, but one of the things I took away was really asking, when someone says, I want to do this, tell me more about what you're trying to accomplish. Tell me what the end goal is. And maybe we can decide together if that specific thing is the correct answer, or if there is something that will make your life easier, something that, we can do to ease that point of pain a little bit.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is I don't let people use the word requirement, because that means you have to do it. And what I want to focus on, and especially when you're working in SharePoint, there are some, people can give you a requirement that and you think in the back of your head, oh my God, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to make it work that way. I try to turn around and say, okay, I understand I think I understand what you're saying, but I really want to understand, what are you trying to get to? What is the outcome we're trying to get to? And then I forgot to mention that actually one of the first questions I like to ask people is, what does success look like? What does it mean when we're done? What are people saying? What are we able to accomplish? What does it mean? What does a day on the life look like when we are successful? And so instead of asking people to define requirements, and Carol obviously learned, she took this to heart. I didn't make this up. I got taught this when I was a junior consultant. You want to focus on the outcomes so that you can derive the requirements for the solution. So understand the end state. What are we trying to accomplish? And then you can try and figure out what's the best way to get there, given the budget, given the time, given any kind of constraint we need to deal with. How do we get to that outcome?
Well, let's use that mantra, that question in this specific point in time, because we have answers to that question. So Carol, if I can direct using that question, what does success look like now, with the little addendum that you have had some accomplishments? Do you mind sharing one or two technology wins that you've moved now, certainly months from having initially met and started to work with Sue, from the whiteboard sessions and the answering questions, and of defining what success looks like? What are some of those now successful projects that are in place that you would be willing to share here on the IntraZone?
The biggest one is our policy center. And that is something that Sue really focused on building out, because it's fairly complex and because we really needed it. So you alluded to this before. We are regulated by a lot of different agencies. We're responsible to Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, Children's Services at a county level. That's just, the smallest beginning. There are just really many different things that we have to consider as far as compliance. And there's a lot of documentation that goes along with that. There are a lot of policies that come with that. So we had to figure out how to be able to update those, to revise them, to review them in a timely manner. And it had really been a fairly burdensome process for one particular person. Her name's Lauren. So we were trying to make Lauren's life better, and also to establish, I call it the one true copy. We had a lot of, I think this is any organization, there were a lot of old copies of things lying around. This one from 2017 says this, but are we sure that it is the most recent version? Maybe not. So what Sue did was build us a policy center that contains the one true copy, and there is logic built in so that we know when it was reviewed. Does it have to go to our board for review? There were just really a lot of factors. So that has been a really big win for us. I have a number of times people will come to me and say, I found this. Is this the most recent one? Well, does it match what's here? Because this is the copy of record. It's a slow process, but we are herding those cats, I guess, getting all of those rounded up and just continuing to work on that as we go along. But that has been a really big win.
Well, I can imagine the early conversation was to Sue in spurred on by a question or just in conversation, we have a lot of policies, and sometimes they're a little out of order, or they're multiple copies and people are not quite sure what they are, and maybe in your mind you weren't thinking, we need a policy center. But I know from past experience with Sue that there have been other customers that have kind of leaned into doing this as one of those first things, of organizing together a central location that people can go and review the policies, update them, inform people of them. But again, part of the discussion that where you started and information and desired outcomes, that probably led to Sue going, yeah, I've heard this before, and we need to do it in a specific way because at CCHO is going to be different than, other customer that's going to have a different process maybe to define the policy and to put it down in writing. But at Sue, anything from a policy center? I know it's not your first policy center, but anything, from a best practices way of discovering that was something that was going to be useful that you remember?
Well, I think Carol's making it sound like I had something like some brilliant idea. The fact of the matter is they had already collected, because this was a problem. Finding policies was an identified business problem. So Greg and Carol and Lauren were already all over this, and I've never had this before. It was so fantastic. A list of every single policy. They had already identified when was it last reviewed, who needs to review it. In other words, they had it wasn't a list, actually, it was an Excel spreadsheet. That spreadsheet already had all the fundamental metadata. We had to do a few things to some of the columns and all that kind of stuff. But essentially we had this unbelievable starting point, because since it was an organizational pain point and the organization was already on it to try and identify what were those key policies. And I think even Carol, weren't they already moved to a single location in a file share or something? So there was already an initiative in place to collect and track. So honestly, it really wasn't that much of a leap to say, oh my gosh, I know what we can do with this. We're going to have a document library. It's going to have metadata, and the metadata is going to change color when it's past its due date. So it'll be easy to visualize which policies may be in progress or in play. And we had some workflows so that, we could send policies to be routed for an approval. And we had to make a determination. Do we do it in place? Do we copy the policy to a review center? And there were a lot of different decisions. And we experimented with a lot of different ways. We did the policy center as a proof of concept during the design. And when we used some opportunities to prototype different approaches. And Carol and I kind of came up with one that we liked after much trial and error. And then we presented it to Lauren and made even more changes to adapt kind of what she wanted. But we iterated. Did not come out magically. I was like, oh, Sue has this magical vision of a policy center and, bingo, here's how it happens. This was really a true partnership. I feel like my head is getting swollen because you're giving me too much credit for this. I had a great partner in both Carol and Greg and Lauren, and they were so well organized that it made it, it's much easier if the client comes in and practically hands you the situation, the solution. It does it's not that hard to make that leap.
Let's make the leap, but land it in a way of something that we talked about before we started recording. Because I think what you've been saying, and you've of course just said around the importance of who you work with and that they came prepared or not. I don't think that's a requirement, but certainly they came prepared. And my small note to you, Carol, if you ever want to see Sue smile, you say one of two words. It's either metadata or Hannah. And I don't want to equate the two. That's not fair. But I'm just going to put that out there. But if we can focus on what Sue was just saying, and maybe Carol, I know you have some thoughts here, that when you started working with Sue, the importance that you shared with me, and I think is really important to up-level here, is that you were willing to catch the knowledge that she was sharing and also be a partner, not just to take it in and have taken good notes and say, thanks for the information. Can you walk through a little bit of that knowledge transfer and how it worked or worked best for you? And of course, with Sue, anything that you can, share as key to what you did, but also helpful for others to know?
From my perspective, Greg stated up front that knowledge transfer was really important to him. He did not want to have this, a beautiful intranet built for us and then not have anybody here that knew how to drive the bus. So that was just really important for him. And one of the things when I presented the idea of hiring Sue to come work with us, one of the things I said to him is, I think we would really work well together. And that was very important just because I think the symbiosis there really matters. So I think the relationship there is really important. And I think also my relationship internally, I came from a little bit of a unique position. I started not in IT where I am now, but as an office manager in one of our outpatient therapy locations. And so I had a different experience there as a user of what existed before, which I actually wondered if we were going to need to give Sue oxygen when she first saw what we had, because we had essentially a 1996 GeoCities site that was just a link farm, and it needed help. We knew that it needed help, but yeah, Sue was like, "This is your intranet." It was really something. So yeah, success looked like leaving that behind for one thing.
I bet there were many, many tears shed using it and saying goodbye to it.
We didn't have a ceremony. I kind of wanted to have a ceremony, but there's always something to do. So, but I also, as an IT person, you make contacts kind of throughout the company. And I'm very much, I'm not our network guy. I'm our training guy. I do a lot of the training. I'm kind of the voice. If there's a communication that needs to go out, it's often me. I was trained as a technical writer. So I had kind of those connections throughout the agency that I think really helped as well. So when Sue and I went into those meetings together, I think this was before we started recording, Sue, but you said there was almost some translation every once in a while. I would talk to you and say, well, this is what they're talking about because there's a lot of internal lingo, acronyms and just culturally things that sound funny from outside. This is what they're talking about. And then I could help also translate the info architecture concepts to people in their own, help make them understand what we were trying to accomplish. So yeah, that was just relationships all around, I think, were so beneficial in this situation.
And you've maintained that. Clearly, we're here on the phone because I, saw the connection and we wanted to put the episode together. But you all have worked really well from the get-go and continue to do so. Is there anything that kind of is the continuation of that, whether it's continuing to work with Sue or just the ways that you learned from Sue that are now the different ways that you work internally with whomever you work with?
Well, I did have to stop saying, well, Sue says to people when I would present an idea. They were like, really? But yes, like I said before, trying to extract the outcome from people rather than I need the intranet to recreate this paper process that we use. I'm a big advocate of that. Regardless, looking at the existing process and trying to see if there are ways that we can make it better. Just some of the ways I saw Sue extract information from people. That sounds sinister, like the Monsters, Inc. Scream extractor. Didn't mean it to sound that way, but
I think there's a secret basement. I have had concerns before.
Let's say she drew information out. That's a more friendly way. But seeing the way she drew information out, and Sue, you mentioned your analogies. I've used a lot of those, and just to help people understand what we're trying to accomplish. One of the things I know you said was mapping what we're trying to do to what already exists. So we're going to give you this OneDrive, and it is what used to be your H drive, let's say. Those were our personal home drives on the server. But just really helping people understand this is a new tool, but it has the same purpose.
Any comment there, Sue? Not specifically what she was asking, but in the broader context of establishing knowledge transfer, maybe how you go about it, or at least re-emphasizing the importance that it has when, you need to find that right person.
Part of the reason we put so much emphasis on knowledge transfer in this particular engagement was because Greg made it a criteria for measuring whether I was going to be successful at CCHO. I mean, he really drilled it into me that I would not be successful unless Carol was empowered to move forward with the content. And honestly, it was music to my ears, because although I love having long-term relationships with my clients, I mean, they become part of my family. You can't really get rid of me. I don't want them to be dependent on me for life. I mean, my goal is to empower them with the knowledge to extend and maintain the solutions that we build together. And so Greg had sort of drilled it, I'm going to basically not make a move without Carol. And what was really nice, actually, is I remember multiple times I would ping her on Teams and saying, hey, I'm about to do something I don't think you may have ever seen before. I need to go set up some enterprise metadata. I had all the superpowers I needed, and I could have definitely done it on my own, but, kept drilling in the back of my head. No, make sure Carol sees you do it. So I would explain what I was thinking, why I thought this was a good idea. She'd catch me making typos, and we do it together so that, when she's wondering, where's that metadata live and how would I add another value to the term set? She was there when all of that was created. And that I had not actually had that much of an emphasis or that close of a partner to make that happen. And it was just really, I was very lucky that most of the time when I was like ready to sit down and do something, I would ping Carol quickly saying, can I have 15 minutes of you? And so you can watch me do this and make sure that this is going to work for you was really, really important. And just to sort of add a follow on, the project I did after CCHO, I've learned a lot. Like, I'm going to insist on that. Well, I really never got that person. There was a person, the person left right before we started the project, and the new person just never did it. And I will say that they're about to launch their intranet with much less knowledge of how to do things than Carol was empowered to do, because she was really committed to being, my partner on the project or part of the team. A lot of consultants want to just do all the work and not have the client be part of the team. Years ago, I used to say, if the client wants to be part of the team, we double the price. And in this particular case, I think it is absolutely critical to the long-term success of intranets in particular, that the client is actively engaged in every single aspect of the design, the build, and ongoing maintenance.
I want to ask on behalf of Carol. Carol, did you get any kickback once you became, a partner, not just a client?
Well, I got to hang out with Sue.
Hey, that's a kickback. That's kicking back the kickback.
One of the things that you said, Sue, reminded me, the reason that I was available all of the time, or most of the time, is because it was such a high priority for me. And I had that support from my supervisor. So when you asked, he wanted me to be available. So as a priority for him, he had the buy-in, I had the buy-in, and that we just, I said earlier, Mark, I attached myself to Sue like a leech. If she was doing something and she let me watch, I was there. I was asking questions. I was taking notes. I'm sure 100 times I said, slow down. I'm writing this down. But you just every step of the way, as much as possible, even though this was all mid-pandemic and we were doing everything virtually, I was just absolutely there with her as much as possible.
When you think about it, that's really why I was saying in the beginning, it's got to be an organizational priority. I want to work on projects that are an organizational priority. I don't want to be number 11 on the top 10 things we're going to do this year, because if you're there, you're just not going to get any focus. And so I think one of the important reminders for me, and what made working with CCHO so successful for everybody, was it was an organizational priority. And it was important not just for Carol, but for her boss, who was giving her the time to be available. And I think ultimately, she knows a lot more about certain aspects of Microsoft 365 than I do, because she's really dug in on the areas that are critical to her organization.
I'm going to take a leap and say, Carol, you mentioned that oftentimes you find yourself saying, well, Sue says, or Sue said. I'm going to bet now at the level that you're at, by not just being a client who hired Sue, but is now her partner, if not sometimes, filling in where Sue would have maybe done some things. I'm going to guess that your manager, Craig, is now often saying, well, Carol says, well, Carol said. So just putting it out there. I bet it happens. And let's
possible.
Consider it knowledge transferred.
I know Lauren, who we mentioned before on the policies, is our champion in the meetings, because people have reported back to me and said, we said this in a meeting. And Lauren said, Carol said, go to Central.
Perfect.
We've assimilated Lauren.
You mentioned 1996 GeoCities site, and that just makes me cringe in all the best of ways, because really it was, the past is the past, and we learned so many things to move things forward. But we've been talking about your successes, and I think it's really important, all the process behind it. But we're never remiss to know that some things come even in, let's say, 2022, or in the last few years, way beyond 1996, but still issues arise. Is there anything that you can share, in this move to, doing things in a different way, and obviously in the cloud? What are some of your technical woes? Whether they're just one thing that was, the main headache, or just a, number of things that, again, to the learning of others who are listening, or to maybe the consolation of, yep, me too, that's happened all as well. But anything that you would share, that's been a part of what's come about, maybe in a little bit of a negative light.
One of the things we ran into is, Sue, I think you opened up our SharePoint admin center and said, what are all these sites? There's stuff everywhere. And that was definitely an issue. And as I have been going through, I still find stuff occasionally, but as I'm going through and talking to people to find out who created this group, what is this site doing? I can't tell you how many times people said, I created that. People didn't know that, or didn't remember that they had created a group. So there were just things sort of hanging around out there, and cleaning that up has been a bit of a task. Trying to make sure we don't ditch anything that's important, but also not allowing things to just linger out there. So one of the things Sue really helped us with wrangling, I guess, is governance. Again, with all the questions, but she just has a huge presentation of questions. What do you want to do about this? What do you want to do about this? What about this? What about this? And, our IT team and our intranet steering committee sat down and just went through all of those questions to try to figure out, what do we want to do? We're not going to implement that perfectly. It takes time, but it's good to ask the questions and set our feet on the right path. So that has been a frustration. And we're working through it, but that will, it'll continue to be something that we have to deal with. I think user adoption is always a point of pain for the people doing the project. We've done something this way for however long. Why do we have to change it? And really the why is one of the ways I try to approach that. I've said, I'm not trying to make your life harder. I'm actually trying to help. I think we can get to a point where we can do it like this, and it'll be a lot easier. The messy middle is going to be a little painful as we change and do that. One of the things that we heard in every meeting, Sue, I'm sure you still remember, every meeting that we talked to people, they said, I get so much email. Can you make the email stop? And so that's one of the things that we have been able to do, and yet we still have a long way to go. We are starting to fix that problem, but it is a continuous frustration. And again, it's what people are used to doing. And so it's hard to break that muscle memory. Oh, I'm going to send an email about this. So, continually working on that. And then I think I mentioned at the beginning, I went to 365 EduCon and I learned all of these really cool things. And now I'm trying to figure out, we're trying to fix this process. What is the best tool? What is the best way we can implement that? I don't want to go after a nail with a wrench when there's a better tool. So just trying to figure that out. That's one of my frustrations at the moment.
Maybe you will join the MVP crowd in writing a what to use when style blog. If you have key learnings, those are always valuable and important, but also highlight, oftentimes, and you made a note of it in terms of a tooling perspective, that there is usually, more than one thing that can accomplish it. But they're all, when you dig in, especially I think at the level of what you're, been taught and are now driving towards and how to come up with a solution, is not to jump on the first thing that feels right, but to actually ask those couple follow-up questions. Can it do this? Do we need it to do that? Yes, everything can, track it in a certain way, but can I do, X or Y? Because that's really important. But yes, that's a consistent one. I will tell you. Both probably Sue and I have taken our chops and honed in on a few of those answers. But at the same time, I also get a lot of those questions that sometimes feel a little painful in the answer. But there's usually a good answer. It just may be multifaceted. So just to wrap up a little, you've shared a lot around how you got started and some of the, the main things that you accomplished to give a little bit of an indication of some outcomes and some reasoning behind it. Is there anything that when you look at, similar to what we were just talking about, this broader toolkit of possibility, not only the what to use when, but what to do next? Is there anything that you can share that CCHO is currently in an early phase of doing when it comes to taking advantage of what you have investments in, but leveraging that solution process of identifying how you're going to do it?
For sure. And Sue, probably some of this is going to be new to you because I don't think we've talked through some of it. But our next big thing is getting our children's residential center, so that would be the main campus where the residential children live, migrated onto SharePoint and really using the tools that we have. There are so many forms. The folks that work in direct care here fill out so many forms. They have to communicate with each other all of the time because they work in shifts. And with the kids that we have, there's often trauma in the background, could be a number of things, but kids will react badly to certain things or react really well to specific interventions. And right now, each kid has, they explained it to me as almost like the back of a baseball card. So the staff has developed over time, getting to know each child, what really works for them, how you can really connect to this particular resident. And if they are in distress, if they're having a problem, what might you try? Right now, staff that works with that child all the time will know those things. But if there is someone that is helping on a shift from another cottage or just on campus and available to help, they don't really have access to that same kind of information. So that is one thing that I'm really working with our director of residential to try and figure out how can we make that kind of information available on our intranet so that someone can access it quickly and easily from their phone, from a tablet, and they might be able to help intervene more quickly, just assist their coworkers, things like that. How can we get all of the shift information to the next shift without having them email it out to, a third of the company?
That is going to be a new real-time form of knowledge transfer. To use the term we've been talking about seriously, having somebody being informed, especially when it can avoid a situation with a known outcome, of how a child may react. That's huge.
Yeah, it almost sounds like Viva Topics, where the topic is the kid. And we're bringing into that topic page all of the static, sort of, basic bioinformation isn't changing. So we're bringing in all the static information that we know about the kid. That's kind of the background stuff. And then the real time conversations, latest and greatest, all the different forms that incident reports is the closest, work related thing I can think of, is because you guys do all those kinds of things, rolling that in to that baseball card topic page for that child, so that if I am dealing with that child, I have everything I need or everything I could want to know about that child all in one place. It's analogous to what Viva Topics is really all about. Knowledge transfer about a topic. In this case, it's real-time knowledge about a child with multiple sources of that information. Because I know some of the content, isn't it in your EHR kind of record as well? So it may require some integration.
Yeah, well, sort of. There are notes and things in the EHR, but that real-time interaction is more direct care based rather than clinical. So sort of. And that's another complicating factor, Mark. We do have, an electronic health record system, and I think I mentioned it. You're always going to know me as the calendar girl, but one of the things that I really want to be able to do is pull that calendar from the EHR, because the clinicians have to use it to let them be able to see when they're busy in Outlook using, a link somehow. And I know it's more complicated than just importing it, but that kind of thing is what we have to think about, because we need the EHR system for billing, for all of those kinds of things. But we do want to be able to pull information from there when necessary, possibly send information. There's CRC is what we call the Children's Residential Center. CRC is going to be just one of the biggest things that I tackle. And I love this stuff. I'm having fun, but it's, interesting issues.
You've obviously articulated a lot of what you're considering and thinking about as a next need, or the outcome being something that's going to alleviate that transfer of, hey, we noted this last night, and what really helped in either a soothing way or something that, avoid that because that had a kind of a negative outcome off of it and how they reacted. Just having that, somewhere connected, I think, to exactly, where you got the solution brain coming from Sue sounds like topics, or, something like it that would mimic, this gathering information around a unique source that would then be, the topic or the child. But, a little bit connecting, to other services, I'll put a little stake in the ground that if you leaned into something like Power Apps and some unique process that connects to that EHR system, but gives you the flexibility to even see things like, calendar information and take notes, not to overblow it into, an extreme solution, but, those are some of the, the magic in between that you can do with tying in other services. But be very curious the direction that you go.
Yeah. When I was at EduCon, the first 2 days I spent entirely with Scott Shearer, Wes Preston, Andy Honeycutt, Power Apps, Power Automate, because I think that is like my next tool step, is to really get comfortable with those, so I can figure out some ways to work with that, just like you're saying.
Good. Well, you will arm yourself with understanding what are we trying to accomplish before you jump into just cracking open Power Apps Designer. But if that is something that helps, it's a wonderful tool. And making those connections, same as you are connected to Sue, all three of the gentlemen that you mentioned, would be really good follow-up conversations if you get further along. Can it do this? We're trying to do that.
And Sue had mentioned, by the way, that she's terribly hard to get rid of. And I just like to say, we don't want her to go away. So please do not.
All right. Well, we will continue through the Intrazone, and of course on your own. I've never found Sue to be at all ever hard to get a hold of in big questions and small. So certainly I wish you luck with that, because the outcome is always going to be positive. You can imagine what you're going to do right after this call. Get back to supporting CCHO and Sue sharing your knowledge and transferring it to somebody. I know somebody's going to catch it today. But thank you both for being on the Interzone. Certainly thank you, Carol, for the work that you do for your clients, your kids. That daily driver is going to be really what makes it all worth it. And very happy to hear that the Microsoft technology supports some of the way that you get there to making it a technical environment that does support whatever they need. And Sue, thank you for your time today as well. Of course, sharing your knowledge, and you can both know that both your knowledges have been transferred to now thousands of Interzone listeners. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.
Up next on the Interzone, it's time for events. If there's an event going on somewhere in the world, we'll feature it here on the Interzone. And up first, Mark, is CommsVerse. That's a hybrid work conference coming up here at the end of June, the 29th and 30th, as part of Mercedes-Benz World in the UK.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of buzz on this online, and it looks like a lot of people are getting engaged, a lot of our common speakers and topics, but it's always a really good focus on what's going on in the world of communication. The next event is Microsoft Inspire 2022. This is a very Microsoft partner-focused show and event. It's all virtual, July 19th through the 20th. It is available for everybody. It won't be only partner information. There will be news and announcements across Microsoft, and specifically a lot of what we're doing with Microsoft Viva and leaning into how partners can engage to help in the sales process, but also to be more fluent on what Microsoft is offering for the employee experience. There's a lot to Microsoft Inspire, but again, it's all virtual. Sign up, it's free, register, and get involved.
It's a great place to look forward because, as we know, hindsight is so 2020. Another event to help you plan is the Gartner Digital Workplace Summit. Now, previously, this was going to be held in San Diego, California live, but they made the decision to run that virtually. It really will be focused this year on the tools to create not just a digital workplace, but to make sure that you have a top-notch employee experience that prepares your workforce for what's to come. They'll be covering new research trends and insights from Gartner experts that will elevate your organization's digital workplace. And of course, Gartner DWS is coming to you June 21st to 22nd.
Next up, as we creep into August, is an event that's local in Dallas, Texas. It's the 365 EduCon show, and Chris and I are both going to be there. We're going to be kicking things off with the keynote, having some fun with the Interzone Live, engaging with a lot of great Microsoft MVP and community speakers, and we hope to have individual sessions as well. We're working on some of the details, but it's always a great show and always very regionally focused. So if you're in the Dallas, Texas area, August 8th through the 12th, join in 365 EduCon Dallas.
And we promise it will be air conditioned because it sure better be to be in Texas in early August. Another warm weather event coming up is the Microsoft Power Platform Conference. That'll be September 20th to 22nd on the properties of Disney World in Orlando, Florida. So this is an event brought to you by the same folks who bring you the Microsoft 365 Collab Conference. This event will be 3 days from Microsoft and our community leaders, focusing on all parts of orchestration and automation, the tools of the Power Platform and beyond.
Next, if we hop over just a couple of days, but the full hop over the Atlantic Ocean to the European Cloud Summit, September 26th through the 28th. This will be in Mainz, Germany, and this brings together major cloud platform providers, world-leading speakers, industry leaders, large customers, and thousands of delegates, and offers an ideal professional networking environment for all attendees. It's very focused on the broad spectrum of the cloud, and it's driven by a lot of great community leads that have been putting on events for many, many years now. So the European Cloud Summit, September 26th through 28th in Germany.
And finally, 365 EduCon will be coming to Chicago at the end of September, the 26th to the 30th, from the same folks who brought you 365 EduCon Dallas. So more to come as we get later into the year. We're hoping to have a lot more announcements for events coming up October through December, which we know is historically a busy period. And fingers crossed, we'll be able to see many of you at a city nearby someplace soon.
We want to thank our guests, Sue Hanley and Carol Zollinger, for being on the show and for giving us insights about technology and the people choices that they made to ensure that the technology gets implemented and used.
We encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about today and more. Visit us at aka.ms/theintrozone.
And you can send us your questions and feedback for the SharePoint teams. You can reach us via email at theintrozone@microsoft.com and via Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Remember, it's summertime, so it's not too early to get your ballot in for MLB All-Star voting. This is the obligatory random sports reference I must always use on every episode of the Introzone. But if you are remembering things, and most of you do, please remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about this show. And follow us wherever you get your favorite tech podcasts.
You knocked that one way out of the park, Chris. We thank you so much for listening. We're your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris, the ever sportscaster McNulty. This has been The Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 knowledge transferring intelligent intranet.